Alright, so with any case, it's getting cold. With any case, I have a psychological question for many of you. And it goes as such. So, essentially, what is the, there you go. What is the, problematic between an individual, or what is the difference of problematic and non-problematic between an individual who has non-threatening delusions, having been said they are delusions, or an individual with threatening delusions, like they become threatening based off of their delusions, they become, defensive to where they attack people and they become extremely dangerous. So what is the problematic to non-problematic between a non-threatening individual with delusions and a threatening individual with delusions? Well, I can only speak on the non-threatening people with delusions, for that is myself. For what is, non-threatening delusions doesn't entirely mean that, it's a problem. It's just a difference, right? It would be a difference, right? Within the case that it is a delusion, and my science experiment went south, I still have my survival and self-protection and protection instincts to those surrounding, right? So if my instinct is to survive and protect myself and not to attack, but to defend my territory, which means myself usually, then in which case, my case wouldn't be problematic. However, I grew up with somebody who has threatening delusions. In other words, they become highly dangerous when they are in a delusional state, right? So if my case is non-threatening delusions, meaning I don't get threatening within the delusions, then in which case I'm not a threat and I'm not a problem to society. So it would just be a weird difference, right? I am different, I'm weird, I'm nerd-like, I'm country folk. So in my case, it would be just a difference in any case. For it is not a problem. And for that, usually people with high intelligence, such as myself, essentially operate differently in society, operate differently with things per the natural abilities within the high IQ. And it's high IQ is determined at birth due to the way the atoms and molecules form. It's essentially a deformity of the molecules and atoms. However, instead of a deficiency within abilities, you have leverage. You have more abilities than the average person. So it's a cell, atoms and molecules is a cell, adverse cell or cells that gives you kind of a one-up by birth. So instead of a defect, you have it in the opposite direction. However, within any case, nobody's perfect, and I didn't choose to be like this. I am born this way. So I was born with superhuman intelligence. I didn't choose it. It chose me, per science, or God, whatever you want to believe in. Now, I have some of the patterns of special needs, that is, simply because if the cell goes in the left direction, you get a learning deficit. If it goes in the right direction, you have superhuman intelligence. It goes in the opposite direction of a learning deficit. Now, with that being said, because it's under the same category, because it's the same line that it gets split within the mental capabilities rather than physical, in terms of the atoms and molecules, what they're responsible for. I have some of the patterns of special needs, however, mine went in the complete opposite direction. So that's why it's hard to read me. That's why people think I'm special needs. Well, entirely, I don't entirely understand everybody with special needs. However, I can respect it. Or I have some of the same patterns. However, I'm not the same. I'm different in my own way. You know, whatever the case may be. I think the difference is I'm able to think before I do. So I can put it in the same category as though, you know, that everybody calls special needs individuals the smartest special needs, right? Or smart special needs. They're very intelligent, right? However, they don't really think before they do. So they kind of do stupid shit with their intelligence. You know. However, you know, mine, I'm the smartest, nicest one. So it's like I kind of think before I do. That I guess, and I don't know if that's the case within the way I grew up or my cell count or, you know, the way my atoms and molecules formed. However, most of the time, it's just a difference in any case. However, it's like, you know, I think before I do. A lot of people don't do that. And mind you, nobody's perfect, right? Everybody has their own niche, if you will. Everybody has their own intelligence. And everybody has their own thing that they strive at. However, within any case, besides the fact, the difference is just as such. In other words, the difference just exists. It's not really a problem, nor it is a problem unless it becomes one. Right? For me, it never was. I'll leave it there. Thanks, guys. Take care.